All right, cool. That is now broadcasting our looping video, just to say, kind of start. Hopefully, we've got a few more people joining us. And I should point some look at the Trello. It just means that things like the Trello and stuff are going to be a little bit like, thankfully, completely underprepared the PowerPoint this time. We went overboard for the Watchmen, spent, a good day doing that, and then realized that it didn't really I thought it was cool, but not many people tuned in. So,
All right. Shall we, without any further ado, kick off?
Yeah.
Do you want to go first or stop streaming the little video?
Okay. Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast / live stream where we try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
And today we're tackling, it's kind of a follow-up to our recent epic podcast with wonderful guest Stephen Cleary on melodrama. And in editing and producing that episode, you and I have had lots of further thoughts and thought that we could revisit it here on the live stream while also trying to apply it to a movie. And that movie is Joker. And I guess whether it's a great screenplay or not is quite a controversial opinion in relation to this movie. It's a bit polarizing.
Well, if you've listened to that episode, and look, it's not a prerequisite, it will help, but if you haven't, then please ask us questions about how we define melodrama, etc. If you have listened to that episode, we do kind of moot the idea about whether or not the Joker was a melodrama. And I think instinctively both of us felt that it used melodramatic techniques, but we weren't clear whether it was a melodrama. And in fact, you raised the possibility that part of the reason that maybe it had a divisive reaction in terms of people's reception was to what extent they thought it was a melodrama.
Quite possibly. Anyway, let's not bury the lead here. Shall we take this opportunity to revisit what the key elements of melodrama were, as I guess we have filtered them from Stephen Cleary's research?
Yeah, I think there's also, yes, let's do that. And then there's this awesome link that we'll actually just bring up on Safari because we can, about someone else who's been kind of cataloging melodrama. So I guess the question is, what is melodrama, Chaz? Okay.
This is going to be me largely paraphrasing my understanding of Stephen's work, but I like in editing last week's podcast, I'm actually super excited about it. I think it's the most eye-opening episode we've done for me in terms of my own work for a long time, because my two favorite films of last year were Marriage Story and Little Women, and both those are clearly melodramas. And I think just in our indoctrination of hero's journey in Western cinema, we've kind of lost sight of what this story paradigm can be. So it's an alternative story paradigm where, and I guess I'm going to define it largely how it contrasts to hero's journey. So it is one where the characters lack agency. They are in a narrative where they do not seem to have power to affect what's happening to them. And so as opposed to the hero's journey where the plot happens to them, as opposed to the hero's journey where the character's decisions and actions drive the plot, in melodrama, the plot happens to them. And because they don't have agency, because they don't have ability to change the world around them, it's often quite catastrophic. And the whole point of that storytelling paradigm is to make you empathize deeply with the character and feel. So it's supposed to be, I guess, a sort of cathartic story experience where you're supposed to bring up all these emotions and relate deeply to ordinary people, or more ordinary people than in Hero's Journey, that and relate to those ordinary people on a deeper level than you may relate to them in Hero's Journey.
Yes. Okay, so
anything to disagree with that?
Yeah. You also may want to check your levels again, Jazz. You tend to have an extremely loud laugh.
It's on like 12%.
Okay, cool. All right. So yes, what did I take? I think it was important that we looked at the idea that there was an absence of a clear ending. So as we'll come up with this episode in general, as part of our breakdown of Joker, is this: we've been talked a lot recently about dramatic questions and character questions, plot questions. And I think melodrama probably leans a little bit more into character questions, that there is an absence of an ending because there's not a clearly demonstrable resolution. That a plot question like, can they stop a bomb? Can they turn off the bomb? Is not a melodramatic type of plot question or character question. So a film like Shame probably does lean more heavily into melodrama, because the plot question about his sex addiction is not something that's easily resolved.
Oh, Shame. I thought you said Shane. And I was like, Shane had a sex addiction.
So for me, it was definitely, that's definitely part of it. That idea of the question not necessarily being easily resolvable, that like life, it kind of goes on, that there's it's not fully resolved. The other thing that kind of really stuck out to me was this idea of the cost of the character. So it's the effect of events on the character. And for me, the idea of the character being passive it's not a requirement for melodrama. I don't know why my gut instinct is. I think when we looked at Stranger Things, like, I was going to say Joyce. Joyce is active. She's not passive. She's not active in the sense of she's going and solving crimes like Hopper, but she is actively trying to connect with her son. So I think the characters can act. They may have agency, but limited agency within the context of the world. But what is important is the effect on them of whatever the significant event is. So similar to the hero's journey, and there is an inciting incident. I think the one thing, like, it's a useful story paradigm. It doesn't have that same sense of like, these are the 12 steps or whatever it is from hero's journey. But I think that's probably a good thing. I think sometimes those structures can get a little bit too melodramatic. There is also this breakdown. Should we bring up that webpage I sent you?
Yep. Do you want me to bring it up?
Yes, if you would like. I'm going to pour my beer because I really need a beer. Both servings.
Let me just find the link.
In today's episode of Stu's Swords, Stouts, and Screenplays, I am drinking a Bourbon Barrel Imperial Stout. It's one of my favorite stouts.
All right. Is that up for you, Stu?
Yes. So I discovered this by just, occasionally vanity Googling Draft Zero, and which happens, and they had linked to us. And it looks like it's a document that they've been working on. This is first published in 2017. So it's like, did they see into the future? And the answer is no. It seems like the team at Slap Happy Larry have kind of got an ongoing page on melodrama, which I actually found was really useful. Like, it covers some of the history, but it's got some really good tips.
Yeah.
So what they identify is the absence of a quest narrative. They talk about like okay, cool.
I'm just going to scroll down to the tips because I thought that was like we can go through the headings.
Essentially, we could just read this aloud. Yeah, it's a great page. We could just read it aloud. We should turn it off, read it aloud, and pretend it's our discoveries.
But I guess I want to say thank you to these guys because, as you say, they've been researching this for a long time. They've put a lot of work into it, but they also referenced our work in the recent podcast and seem to. Okay. Yeah. They made us sound smarter.
Here, what is melodrama for? This I thought was good about rousing strong emotions and invoking pathos, because I think that ties to Joker. And I think part of the divisiveness was that in some people it invoked an incredible sense of pathos, and in some people it didn't. And I think that's partly because the Joker, and I'll say this now, this is kind of my thesis that I'm dropping in the Joker's got a hero's journey as an A plot or an anti-hero's journey, but the B plot is a melodramatic B plot. And I think you're shaking your head, which doesn't.
I'm wiggling my head. I'm doing an Indian maybe.
Wow. Just a maybe would have worked. Okay. Okay, so the rousing strong emotions, implicit shared attitudes, I'm not sure, but the cast of characters, typically a family. The domestic setting is something that is to me a clear aspect of melodrama. And Joker does have a domestic setting in a way that feels fresh for a superhero film. I mean, we don't really get into the domestic setting of Captain America, you know, and the domestic setting of Batman is barely a domestic setting. It's him and, you know, the rich white man and his servants.
But I think they're also defined by their, like what you've got here, opponents. So it's like the opponent is oppression and they're fighting for freedom, and they don't often achieve that. And so when that is the structure, quite often that will dictate a lack of quest. Like in a quest, you've got a plan and the plan either goes right or goes wrong. But in melodramas, the plans are sort of constantly thwarted. But anyway, we'll post a link to this. I'll chuck it in the YouTube chat, and we'll chuck it in the show notes if this eventually gets released as a podcast. But really great piece of writing, and thank you for making us sound smarter and crediting us.
So, you don't want to go through the tips?
I thought maybe we could get there maybe at the end. Do you think?
Yes, we can do that. There's nothing that stood out. I know we're now discussing what we should have pre-discussed, but there was nothing in there that we needed to kind of put up front for Joker, you don't think?
I don't think so. Beyond what we've already highlighted. The one thing that I wanted to ask, because you and I, mainly through Stephen's guidance, now think a lot in sort of sequence-based terms. And so we had a great episode with Stephen where I think 2 now, where we were talking about sort of plot-driven sequences and plot character sequences, and then character-driven sequences, and even removing all of those thematic sequences. And so, you know, on all those sequences are generally defined by the questions being posed by the scene or sequence in question. And I just wanted to distinguish, I think there's a difference between, I mean, first of all, I don't even know if you can have a quote unquote melodrama sequence, because melodrama is a storytelling paradigm. You can definitely have a storyline or a subplot that is melodrama. I don't know if you can have a melodrama sequence or scene per se. That's something I'd probably have to take up with Stephen. But I just want to draw a couple of distinctions. First of all, I feel there's a difference between when you're in a genre heavy film where you just stop asking plot questions, which is something that we looked at in a couple of scenes in Knives Out.
And earlier on in our sequence structure episode in the homestead sequence in The Bourne Identity, which interestingly is domestic. And thinking about it now, you get a similar homestead sequence in Logan. So maybe Shane, obviously, you know, that maybe those kind of little quiet pauses are slightly melodramatic, but they're not asking the big questions. They're not necessarily about evoking pathos, you know, the big emotions, the big emotional cost on these characters of whatever no-win situation that they're in.
So I don't think they're melodramatic. I think they're different. I think the point of a character-driven sequence is just to make the audience sit back and go, who is that character? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? Right? And melodrama seeks to do the same thing, but I think because in melodrama, you've got characters without agency. It's not that those characters in those those character-driven sequences don't have agency. They just don't have a decision to make in that scene or in that sequence. Does that make sense? I think for me,
it's a good contrast. It is a good contrast, because I think I would argue that in the Joker, the second act is melodramatic, and it kind of dissipates a little bit because the melodramatic question, in a way, the dramatic question that drives a lot of the second act's B story cannot be resolved, right? And so therefore it kind of disappears a little bit in the third act. It's done its job in terms of motivating the Joker. And I know we're kind of like talking around the point before we start breaking it down, but you know, I think, doing it on a scene level is a little bit more difficult, because once you acknowledge that there's a domestic aspect to these characters, you're going to want to go and deal there. Otherwise, it's just a moment of pause, right?
Yeah, well, to me, there's a difference. So Joker has got lots of scenes where it's just not asking a plot question. It's just asking you to empathize or explore what Arthur Fleck's mentality is. Right. And I think those are different to sequences or scenes, which we might then describe as melodramatic, because those sequences or scenes might be defined more by the catastrophic nature of the plot happening to them and the lack of agency. So I just wanted to distinguish those two things, because you could potentially argue Joker's not a melodrama at all. It's just a film, a hero's journey film that is littered with moments where they don't ask plot questions, is one potential way to look at it. And the other thing I would just distinguish is between melodrama and tragedy.
Yeah, good point.
It just sounds obvious, but it's something that I've had to come to terms with, is that there's lots of hero journeys films or stories that are tragic because, you know, I'm a bit wary of throwing jargon around, but, you know, where a character chooses their want over their need is tragedy. Like in Macbeth is never not in control of the plot. His decisions never don't drive the plot. He's not a character without agency. He always has agency. It is a tragedy, not a melodrama. And I just wanted to raise that, because whether you look at the Joker as an anti-hero story or potentially as a tragedy, it's different to a melodrama. I just want to point out that John Paul McGowan joined us from the Script Pipeline Writers Mixer, who he writes melodrama for the stage, and he agrees so far with our assessment of what makes melodrama. And I asked him to come and join us.
That was 10 minutes ago, Jazz.
Sure. But we may well have been wrong since. But the reason why I wanted him to come on is I think there are, like Marriage Story, there's tons of comedic moments in there. Melodrama doesn't mean depressing or sad.
It just means strong emotions, and strong emotions in the audience. And this is looking back, and I know we're laying a lot of pipe here before we get into the main show of Joker, but it was what struck me about listening to the Ladies in Black section when we were reviewing it, was what I think we missed in our analysis, why that film was effective for me, but I'm just going to assume effective for you and even Stephen, because we both all acknowledged that we kind of found it a moving film. Yeah, but I think it's that you feel you as an audience want something for the characters as well. You have a want for them. You want them to find love, right? And that, or you want them to be acknowledged. Or as I put it when I was watching it, I'm like, in Ladies in Black, we want all these characters to be seen, to use the modern terminology. We want these characters to be seen. And when they are, that is when we feel an emotion for them, right? That we feel that I can't remember their names now, but you feel that they have been acknowledged, that they have been someone else, that the love story of her confessing to her boyfriend and him, it doesn't change the plot, but it's important that she is seen. And I think that is something that we haven't quite articulated properly, but there is a more complicated relationship, emotional relationship with the audience and our desires for the characters that is different from them. Oh, we want them to stop the bomb. Yeah, of course we want them to, like in a Mission Impossible film, we want them to kind of got the 30 minutes and get there in the time, but that is us not having a want or a need for the character. And so I think that kind of little subtle melodramatic idea probably threads its way into things like romantic comedies as well, you know. But that idea of we want the character to be seen, I don't have any other way to articulate what that is, but I think you can have desires like that. In
terms of comedy, I'm going to segue.
I want Arthur to be funny. Like I want that desire. I want more than anything for him to actually be funny.
And he wants to be seen.
Yes.
Like that's his main driving goal, I think, outside of wanting a dad.
And
Is the rain coming in through my mic?
Yes. Talking about pathos. Oh man, it just belted down. I got to wear my new rain pants for cycling today, so I'm very excited.
Excellent. So look, just before we jump in, I'll try and talk quieter and closer to the mic. But before we jump into Joker, one of the two of our listeners have communicated to us since that podcast came out. I don't know how they listen to a 3-hour podcast in a week. It would take me longer than that. But Mel, who appeared on both our Watchmen live stream and on our Star Wars Mandalorian episode, she arced up at the same point that I arced up in terms of Stephen Cleary's description of melodrama in a historical setting as being a less respected and vulgar art form. And he contrasted it to Shakespeare and Moliere. And potentially Shakespeare and Moliere both were more adherents to hero's journey, that they have more active protagonists, but those melodrama and commedia dell'arte and the roots of all those playwrights at the time were very vulgar, very common, very popular. And I just found it interesting that I just wanted to acknowledge Mel's point that she arced up at the same observation that I did when Stephen was talking.
Yeah, and that is also in a better written form, again, in that slappy Larry. What am I? At the risk of like getting people just to look at that, we should post that into the live chat so it's in the record for the. Oh, have you? Did you?
About 10 minutes ago, Stu.
Weird. Okay. No, it's not here.
Under Crob's smiley face.
Yeah, weird. It didn't come through. But I had a weird thing with Discord where literally it attributed something I said to Leon that I was talking to, and Leon thought I said it, and it was this weird kind of like miscommunication because of technology. Yeah, that's way off track. I think that's important. Look, and as I say, I'm not entirely, for my purposes anyway, convinced about the active versus inactive protagonist, because I think you can have things happen to you and that you're reactive or active or be still, and they're character choices, and that you may lean more heavily into melodramatic techniques if you've got a still character, but I don't think it's necessarily a requirement. And I think we should acknowledge, kind of list some of them. Not seeing it there, not there. Did you remember to hit return, Chaz?
I can see it.
Wow. All right.
I could fucking post a screenshot of it there.
He's just gonna, guys. This is what's like.
I'm posting it again.
He's trying to own us all for not seeing it by like, well, guys, I'm gonna live.
I just don't know if YouTube is failing. Can you see Crob's smiley face?
I can see it in my mind's eye as well as on the page.
I don't know. Maybe there's something about YouTube live chat and posting links. I don't know, but
yes. Okay. Anyway, they do a little bit of.
Crob's just said he just posted it, and I can't see Crob posting it either. So I think it's a YouTube live. Yeah, links are being auto hidden. I think you're right, Crob.
That's all right. That's cool. We'll,
how about I'm going to screen share the
URL.
Yes.
Slappy Harry Larry. Anyway, they do a little bit of
slaphappylarry.com/melodrama-writing-tips.
What a creepy list of video, like of what you cricket.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't porn.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a sad indictment of my sex life that I search more cricket than porn.
You get a lot of bat and ball in your life, but it's just not
Anyway, that
not
is
not the fun kind, the boring kind.
That is our pipe laying for this live stream before we jump into the meat and potatoes to have another innuendo metaphor for Joker.
Well, yeah, okay. So what's important, I think, what I was trying to get around to, rather than we diverge in the historical, is that there's melodramatic techniques, which we talked about at the end of that episode. And if I didn't have an insane week, we would have written some of these down. But essentially, the job of the melodrama is to align. A lot of the techniques are about bringing you into the interiority of the character. And the more still the character is, the more you have to use those quote unquote melodramatic techniques to bring you in to them. It's worth noting that like the voiceover and the flashbacks and all that stuff that we saw in Handmaid's Tale was non-existent in Ladies in Black. And it also was largely non-existent in Stranger Things. Handmaid's Tale had to use it because it was a character that was more passive than the other two, right? What is interesting is the Joker, at least in kind of its narrative language, it's closer to Handmaid's Tale than it is to Stranger Things or Ladies in Black, which are a bit more kind of meat and potatoes in terms of the presentation of the narrative, right?
Yeah. And we've got the script, and I think there's definitely some of those writing techniques, some of those on the page techniques that Stephen talked about are present in the script that we have. So, Stu, why Joker?
Why Joker? Besides the fact, I mean, there was a little bit of self-serving thing that we know that it's a film that has quite a loud fan base. You know, it kind of generated a lot of discussion for better and for worse. And we felt that people people have an opinion on the film. It's a film that invites opinions, right? So that's kind of like a larger meta thing. And then it's because we brought it up on the podcast, and you and I had different reactions as well. Not like massively different, but it's hilarious how much we argue like over like you giving something like what was it recently? You were arguing how much better Infinity War was than Endgame, even though you literally gave them the same star rating.
Not on first watch. Not on first watch.
Anyway, and so I think, but you actually said this is not a film that could be rated in your review, where I was a little bit more like, I really admired the filmmaking. I just didn't feel like it said anything new. But I also think that's like an age thing. You know, I'm sure
because you're so much more ancient than me, Stu.
No. What I mean is that, you know, for me, it was like, wow, we live in a society is like a massively dramatic revelation for people. What the fuck? Like a film that actually speaks to that being like a toxic hand grenade or something was just so strange to me, because I didn't actually feel the film was like, I could see why it was controversial in the same way that Taxi Driver was controversial, because it was essentially aligning the audience with a character that was quote unquote unlikable, or that was kind of transgressive. So the idea that it was somehow going to be a spokesperson for incels, but having watched it now twice, it's not there. Like the incel thing is a very specific ideology, and for better or for worse, the Joker avoids discussing the Joker's ideology. The closest is at the end, but what's interesting about the end speech is his worldview isn't necessarily consistent with how he's acted either. Right. And I think that's what's interesting. And I think to the strength, one of the best parts of the film is how you go by the end of it, you understand how the Joker can end up becoming a almost like a jihadist. Like he can recruit people. Like that's part of the Joker in Batman, is he always has got these followers, and you're kind of like, you know, in the which is not something they kind of talk about in The Dark Knight, right? Thinking of like the other great Joker film. And we kind of get a sense that maybe at the beginning he just lies to people and betrays them. But in this film, they've done a good job of like, okay, this is why he can get followers, because he speaks some kind of language of being downtrodden. I'm having to keep on talking because Chaz has walked off to like have a whiz or something. No, he's actually pulling out the comic.
So it's not the comic, it's a comic by Azzarello, who wrote 100 Bullets, the Vertigo line. And it's a really great book that is told from the perspective of someone who falls into the orbit of the Joker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. So anyway, you're absolutely right. I think I was much more moved by the film than you were, and that probably speaks to the melodrama techniques working more on me than on you, and also it aligns very much with my politics, or at least my read of the film. And I think
because our politics are actually
quite similar.
Mostly, you're more paternal than me, but
I'm more fascist.
Yes.
Chaz
knows best. You're not fascist, you're Chazist.
I will be the benevolent dictator. I felt angry at the same things the film felt angry at, and because I felt seen and aligned with it, then I was much more moved by it. But the thing that I find, you're presuming to know what I was feeling. I can only go by your Letterboxd reviews.
My Letterboxd review is 3 emojis. That's my initial Letterboxd review. It's literally just in emojis. So, you know.
All right. I will stop making presumptions. Except you also made a comment that you agreed with Julio. But the thing that
was specifically about the ending. I mean,
yeah. Yes. And we'll get to that as well. But where I get frustrated with the film is that everyone who has a criticism of it, like it potentially being read as an incel manifesto, I'm like, Todd Phillips has not made a stand that says that's not the case. Like, because the film doesn't seem to plant a flag, especially around the ending, means that it can be read in so many different ways. Anyway, let's I'm just going to share the screenplay version that we have, so that we can have a look at it. So this, is that come up for you, Stu?
Do we want to give a summary of the film?
Well, because the next I want to show the homepage, the
homepage,
front page.
the homepage of the script.
Yes. Anyway, Joker: An Origin, written by Todd Phillips and Scott Silver. And this is, we've got the shooting script. We decided to read the shooting script as opposed to a script dated a few months earlier. And it's very lean, the script. It's 104 pages. So it's possible that earlier versions of the script had more melodrama writing techniques than this shooting script,
or the fact that Todd was writing it for him to direct influenced him, whereas with Handmaid's Tale that was not the case.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go to this front page. This story takes place in its own universe. It has no connection to any of the DC films that have come before it. We see it as a classic Warner Brothers movie, gritty, intimate, and oddly funny. The characters live in the real world and the stakes are personal. Although it is never mentioned in the film, this story takes place in the past. Let's call it 1981. It's a troubled time. The crime rate in Gotham is at record highs. A garbage strike has crippled the city for the past 6 weeks, and the divide between the haves and the have-nots is palpable. Dreams are beyond reach.
Slipping into delusions. Oh, I was hoping for us to say it together, but fine.
I don't know how Zoom, like, maybe it would cancel both of us out and neither of us would read it.
And the universe will implode.
So anyway, that hopefully that summarizes what the film is about. It's an origin story of the Batman villain, the Joker, but not entirely in the absence of Batman, but quite in the absence of Batman. I think this film is quite clever with how it plays with its audience expectations of it.
Yes. So this is the kind of a log line from Wikipedia, which is set in 1981. It follows Arthur Fleck, a failed stand-up comedian whose descent into insanity and nihilism inspires a violent countercultural revolution against the wealthy in a decaying Gotham City. What is interesting about that is it foregrounds something which is this revolution, which is actually largely background in the film, because we so stick to Arthur's point of view.
Yeah.
It's until like almost the final 10 minutes, you know?
Yeah. All right. So somehow segueing back to our Trello, I suggested bearing the lead here and just asking, is Joker a melodrama? Should we try and summarize? In true Chaz style, I actually ended up drawing up a list of the things that made it a melodrama and the things that made it not a melodrama.
He did a pro and cons list, which I actually tried to convert into a side-by-side column thingy. Do you want me? I think it's got, as I said, melodrama is the B story, and the B story is, who is the Joker's father, right? To me, that is a melodramatic question. It doesn't, it's shown as a significantly important question.
Why is it a melodrama question? I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm asking why, because it sounds like a plot question.
It is a plot question, but ultimately it's a plot question. Melodramas are plotted, as we talked about in this episode. They've actually got really strong plots, but they're less about the twist and the turns. This isn't like, oh, is this person my father? No, it's not. This person's my father. Oh, no, it's not. Right. And having just watched some BoJack Horseman, which is about him trying to work out the mother of his daughter. Spoilers. And that is like a running gag. Is this their, blah, blah, twist and turns. It's not treated as a melodramatic question, right? It is, there is an absence. There's an absentee father. We know that there is an open question about who his father is. And that has an importance on Arthur. It's very early on in the first act that he has the kind of the dream sequence where he goes to, what's his face's?
Murray Franklin's
Robert De Niro character, Murray Franklin's thing, and then imagines that, Murray Franklin approves of him. I wish I had a son like you, that we know that the idea of who his father is emotionally significant to his sense of abandonment. The way that then the film treats it, I mean, this could almost be the entire like this is just my thing, and then I could just be quiet now. Is that the way that the film, it's not twist and turning, because once it's raised that the idea that not Bruce, but what's his name? Wayne.
Yes. Thomas Wayne.
Okay, you're scrolling through VL. You're doing a stew now.
Yeah.
Well, you're showing
the fantasy sequence that he has where he
and it's 15 minutes in. So it's almost in the classic inciting incident of the film. And it's and you know, like A and B plots, the kind of active plotted question and the B plot are tightly entwined, right? Yeah. So we actually kind of, the A plot and the B plot are all like work on each other. So who is his father when it's the possibility that it's Thomas Wayne, that actually pushes Arthur into action. And I think it's not long, you know, him getting fired then leads into the train where he kills these people, et cetera, and we'll talk about that.
I think Trish has raised in the live chat how the B plot that you're describing is a melodrama B plot by rephrasing the question. Is it because the existential angst over his father, and I would argue over the absence of a father figure, is the cause of his illness that makes him Joker?
I don't know. Okay, I like how you presume that. That's not why I think it's a melodramatic question. I think the melodramatic question is because the film refuses to answer when it raises the possibility that it's Thomas Wayne, even though Thomas Wayne gives him an answer in the bathroom. It's joking. The film never definitively makes a choice to never definitively answer that. Yeah. That is actually entirely possible that his mother, even though she's delusional, is telling the truth. And she said, I was forced. Thomas Wayne's a very powerful person. He made me sign these papers to make you look adopted, right? Yeah. The film cannot answer it. Is not who is he? He can never get his father back, right? Whoever it is never going to find it out. And it's more about the impact of the absence of the father, learning that it may be someone really important and special, and then that person denying him, to me, is a melodramatic question. To rephrase this in a different genre, this is like a pauper. This could be a Shakespearean story about some peasant learning that the king, that they may be the bastard child of a king, like in a Game of Thrones kind of world. Yeah. And him then being an heir to the throne. And it's like, I just want you love, and the king denying them, right? That to me is kind of a melodramatic question. And it's still a possibility. And that's one of the things I liked in terms of what it did for the Batman-Joker relationship. The idea that the Joker believes that Batman's his half-brother kind of explains why the Joker never quite kills him, and really does go, we're like two sides of the same coin. You know, kind of really works. And that is, to me, the core kind of melodrama story. There's other elements about the effect of the world on the Joker, which is kind of like part of the given circumstances. But in terms of an active through line, to me, that is the most melodramatic, because what is the effect of this crumbling world on Arthur Fleck could also be seen as an active melodrama. But I don't think it's quite in the same, in the Cleary sense of like this specific moment. What is the effect of like the disappearance of Will on Joyce, right? What is the effect of learning that Thomas Wayne may be his father on Arthur? And he's never going to learn that question unless he takes a DNA test. Yeah.
I think I 100% agree with you. Like, clearly it's the last moment in the film before he goes over the top and becomes Joker. Because in the script, interestingly, after he murders Randall, he's referred to as Joker, no longer as Arthur. And it is that learning or reading of his mother's file out of Arkham Asylum that drives him there. So I'm not disagreeing with you that it's not the main the biggest catastrophe in his life, but I think there's lots of elements, and it's not just about the world, but everything that's building upon him that is breaking him down.
I'm not denying that, but there's like a difference between this is the impact of the world, and we can look at that as like a larger story. But I wouldn't say what is the impact on the world on Arthur is kind of like a C thing, right? Well, I don't think it's not an active plotted question. It's not something that you drive a sequence. The second act is partly about, like, they raise it at 15 minutes, that we learn at 15 minutes that that he's missing a father and he's looking for a father figure, which also explains his relationship with the fellow comedians, right?
Yeah.
That he wants to be seen, but he also wants a loving finger. And then that drives, I have to scan through the movie, but when Thomas Wayne deny and then he goes to the Arkham Asylum, yeah, that's really towards the end of the second act, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is probably the second act turning point. So I'll just share the screen once more. So it's where it reveals not only like that, the film confirms that he's been delusional with his relationship to the neighbor, Sophie, as well.
Yeah, so they made a choice. So at that point, we have been in on the film has structured it so we see our delusion. Yeah, so it's basically his delusionment arc,
and him learning that is what drives. I think the second act turning point is him murdering his mother.
Because he believes that so the effect of learning. So I guess you could argue it's a plotted question. In that, is Thomas Wayne his father? He believes it's no, so he murders her. But I think it's more that he is disappointed. But these are the kind of ambiguities that the film is playing with.
Well, I 100% agree with you. I think the only difference that I'm coming at to this film, in difference to you, is that you saw the melodrama story, the melodrama techniques. You see them somewhat more confined to a particular subplot.
No, that's it. Once again, you being a Chaz fascist. No, I'm saying that is a storyline. I think the way the film is told uses melodramatic techniques. Yeah. They're kind of, that's what is interesting about the film is you kind of decouple it.
Yeah.
Because the techniques that we're talking about that we quote unquote ascribe being melodrama to can equally be applied to something that is more plot driven, like Fight Club, right? That is a film that uses voiceover, that uses lying to the audience, aligning with the character, et cetera, but to tell something that's more classically hero's journey. Those techniques are separate from the narrative aspects of what makes melodrama. The melodramatic question of what is the cost of this does not require you to use voiceover, does not require you to use slow motion, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
They are narrative techniques that you use to support the kind of storytelling the storytelling paradigm, but the paradigm of we're going to do something that is more about the effect of something, the cost of something on a character, rather than the ways they're active. Does that make sense? And I don't disagree with you that the effect of the world, what is the cost of living in a world that does not give a fuck about someone like Arthur Fleck, is absolutely part of the milieu and woven into the story.
Yeah,
right. I'm just saying, but I don't think you could tell a whole melodrama story just about what is the cost of this character living in that world, because it's not going back to Handmaid's Tale, it is not a moment of this is a thing that is happening to this family, right? The father leaving can be the melodramatic story, but like just living in that world, it is C's story,
Okay, so here's why I invoke the world less than the Thomas Wayne storyline, is that I actually experienced the film as a series of the world being imposing on Arthur until he breaks. He's broken by a series of things, including the Thomas Wayne storyline that sorry, fucking Siri. He's broken by a series of things, including the Thomas Wayne storyline, that force him into action. He only really has agency, like active agency, in 3 or 4 key moments throughout the film. And each of those is preceded by a whole lot of things being taken away from him, and him having control taken away from him, having society pushed upon him. So for me, the moments where Arthur takes action are where he has agency, not where he just takes action, but where he has agency, where he dictates to what the world should be rather than the world dictating what he should be. Is the first one is him shooting the Wall Street douchebags on the train. And the next one would be him doing the stand-up, even though that then plays out interestingly. We'll get into that in a bit. Then him murdering his mother, murdering Randall, and the climax of the film. And the way that I experience the film is in each of those points, there's a whole lot of different whether it's world, whether it's his job, whether it's his relationship with Sophie, whether it's him finding out about his father, they go through scenes and sequences where he has no power and shit is just happening to him and it's piling on top of him until violence, right? And it's interesting that those, what makes it not a melodrama is that he does have these points where he takes action and he changes the world around him and he does dictate the plot, but they've used kind of melodrama techniques to sustain you between what would be much less of those moments in the actual, like if this was a hero's journey story, there would be much more, I have a plan and I'm going to do this. And because they've got much fewer of those moments, they've used melodrama techniques to sustain you to those points of violent outburst, violent action.
All right. So there's a quote that I love is the wrong word, from Hannah Arendt, which is the truest command comes from the barrel of a gun. Right. And so she talks about that in the context of authority, like it's from her banality of evil in the context of what gives rise to totalitarianism. That idea that effectively, as you say, agency, he can influence the world only through violence. So he learns that violence is the only way that he can have power. And originally what is interesting about the ending is, you think you assume that he is planning to commit suicide on television, right? And then he decides, no, actually, fuck you. And that's what's great about the moment is the twist. It goes from I'm going to kill myself on your show to teach the world a lesson to, no, I'm going to kill you on the show to teach the world a lesson.
Yeah. Trisha said he wasn't whole to start with. Has inherited mental illness and the forming of his self didn't get to happen properly, lack of guidance and confusion around his father. I'm not disagreeing with any of that.
Lots of pop psychology. I just finished listening to the audiobook of In My Father's House, which is a history of crime across 5 generations of one American family. I have to get the exact quote, but it's something like 5% of families are responsible for 50% of crimes, and 2/3 of crimes committed by 10% of families. So, and there is this idea of epigenetics and all that kind of work. So that is part of criminology, but I don't think the film is actually interested in any kind of understanding of criminology at all, other than the society is kind of, which is my issue with the film, is more about its kind of lack of rigorous world building, which is why I don't have a problem with it quoting King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, in the same way that The Dark Knight owes so much to The Heat. It's not that they're derivative, but I think that its understanding of the world, as much as it says we're grounded in the real world on that opening page, it's the real world of Scorsese films. This is someone who grew up on their understanding of what living in gritty, crime-infested New York is through watching Scorsese films, not like Scorsese who actually grew up there.
Okay, hold on. Let me just describe up until the murder of the plot points that happen in the film, up until the murder of the Wall Street gang. The Wall Street douchebags, not a gang, sorry. But what
makes them not a gang? They're a bunch of white guys picking on people on a fucking train. Man, Wall Street is the greatest gang of fucking all.
Happy to concur. But I think if you take the first act of Joker, you couldn't describe it any other way than a melodrama. So it opens on him painting his face, and having a very sort of interior moment where you're wondering who is this guy, and it's prompting you to ask character-driven questions. It's then got the beating. So I'm
going to disagree with you now. I have that still up. You're saying it's a melodramatic. It's the ordinary world. This is what I mean. Like, this is the hero's journey stuff. Ordinary world, commits an act of violence. That takes him to the extraordinary world, which is him learning that violence is power. He comes back with the knowledge of the elixir, which is violence equals power. And then he comes back with violence, and therefore he becomes the Joker. It is a hero's journey. That A plot, 100% hero's journey, and may only be told in these kinds of like key scenes. And that's what I mean by like the B plot. B plot's not just his father. B plot's the effect of the world, and him like being stripped of like his support and learn to not take his meds, etc. But what he has learned by the end of the film, right, is that violence gives him agency.
Yeah,
right? I'm not so important. That's why it's so important that he kills his colleague, because his colleague picks him off. That's why he needs to go and kill the host. It's the violence no longer becomes internally directed because his violence is on himself. Him being skinny is him punishing himself for not being funny, for him feeling that he's inadequate. And then he learns through a hero's journey structure that violence gives him power. And this is the toxic, controversial aspect of it, right? You can say that, oh, that's not what the film is really saying, but that is what it's structurally saying, in the same way that Zero Dark 30 says that the torture works as much as it also kind of criticizes that. It's structurally, it's asking a question and giving you the answer. And the answer is, what do you do if your ordinary world is that you have no power? You kill someone and you become a fucking folk hero. And then you can continue committing crimes unpunished.
Okay. I agree with all that, because you could argue that the opening to any movie is melodramatic until the plot kicks in.
Until the plot instant kicks in. And if you remember back to the episode, it's not so much these are active plot questions. I'm selling my daughter to my neighbor, my not so pleasant neighbor, but it becomes like, it's less about the plot twists than it is more about what is the effect of that inciting incident on the family.
Sure. And I think and I agree with you in the second act that it uses a lot of techniques. I'm just like, in the first act, it is a character study of what is it like to be a person who has no power over their world. And that's in the way, what is the cost of endurance? And in that way, those are questions that are not necessarily posed by the world building of heroes' journey story paradigms, right? So just,
I thought you were arguing this wasn't a melodrama, but now you're arguing it is. I'm so confused, Chaz.
My view, subtly differently to yours, is I think that this uses sequences of melodrama to build up to what is overall an anti-hero story structure.
Okay. No, I don't. I just argue that that sequence stuff is largely centered around the father and largely in the second act.
And I think that's
the father's not the only melodramatic story.
And I think that's where I disagree with you. I think there's a lot of other melodramatic story elements to the film. And I'm just, so the opening, you've got the classic thing of him being beaten up by those kids on the street. And in the script, it does that writing stuff that Stephen Cleary was talking about. Close on Arthur's clown face, down on the ground, sweat running down his face, smearing his makeup, doesn't even look like he's in pain. He just takes the beating. Arthur's good at taking a beating. That stupid smile painted on his face. Right?
That's good writing.
And so here's this shot. And I watched it in the cinema with my wife, Anna, and we watched it again last night. She was doing some nursing professional development on her laptop, but glancing at it. And at this shot, she's like, they should have ended the movie here. This is the summary of the ending. This, for her experience of the film, was this is a guy who just gets beaten until he can't take it anymore. That was her experience of the film. That's also my experience of the film, but I'm not disagreeing with any other reads of it. But what makes that first sequence for me, the first act, which then goes on and just gets worse and worse and worse. Like, he has that sequence on the bus where he's got the uncontrollable laughter. We've got that first fantasy that you've already talked about, where he fantasizes about a talk show host being his father. And that is expressly, it's told to us in the filmmaking techniques that it is a fantasy more than it does in the film. I'll bring up the script because, again, this is the shooting script and it's very lean, but angle on Arthur clapping in the middle of the crowd. He's dressed richer in quotes. It's Arthur's fantasy version of himself. Everyone around him is enthusiastically applauding Murray. So both the script and the film is telling us it's a fantasy. And that's a very melodramatic technique in terms of, this is the equivalent of Offred's voiceover, for example, or her flashbacks into her past. It's a narrative technique that is just to give us insight into who is Arthur, how does he feel, what does he want, right? And this whole sequence is about what is the cost of him surviving in this cruel world. He gets threatened by his boss, which is followed up by him kicking trash.
I'm just playing this transition because it does give you a moment. The transition is clever in the film. The revelation. So in the script, they clearly set it up as the framing device at the beginning.
Yeah.
and in what I'm playing before like YouTube
Mm.
cancels us.
Yeah.
Like you definitely get that sense that he's better dressed, but
Yeah.
it's done in an slightly ambiguous way, but
Mm.
it will no longer be ambiguous at the end.
Yeah. And the way they've color graded it, but the fantasy sequence that I think you and I will talk about that happens later in the film with his stand up with Sophie, I think that is much more
And putting us inside his delusions.
Yeah. So can I steal the screen one more time? So
I've actually said it, so you can also share at the same time.
Oh whoa. Okay.
So unlike Chazism, Stewism is all about sharing.
So unlike the so in the film he gets threatened by his boss, and then we cut to a shot of him kicking something behind a dumpster in an alleyway. And here's what it says in the script. We don't hear anything, and we can't make out what it is that he's so violently beating down. It could be a cat, a cardboard box, a homeless person. We don't know. And that is melodrama writing, right? It's trying to put us in the audience of what we should be feeling when we're watching this, and whether we empathize with him or not. And, you know, it just keeps going. Like, this building is so awful. Like when he meets Sophie for the first time, you know, if Thomas Wayne saw this place, it would make him sick. His own mother saying to him, don't you have to be funny to be a comedian? Like, it is just every element of the world is highlighting how powerless he is and how useless he is. And that's what to me makes it melodrama. Now, I completely agree with you that world building is setting up the normal world, but in other heroes' journey stories, the normal world isn't necessarily asking the question about how little power do you have over the world? What is the cost of living in this world?
Rob's going to love this. Luke Skywalker in A New Hope, he doesn't have power, right? He has to do what his parents say. Like he's his ordinary
aunt and uncle.
His aunt and uncle. Yeah, sorry. Not his real parents of Obi-Wan and Padme. That's the true canon. The true canon. Anakin is not his father.
Yeah.
He's the product of a. Yeah. Anyway,
I'm
you know, like he doesn't have that power. Like I think it's interesting that we're kind of, because this is the complexity. I think is the truth. This is why the Joker is an interesting thing to talk about, because I don't actually disagree with anything you're saying. I use the father storyline as an example of the B plot, but the B plot is everything separate to the investigation of the murder. Because the A plot is he kills these people on the train. The active plot question is, will he get caught? And the answer is he will get caught. But then
because he confesses.
He confesses live on air. Like that is the A plot, and everything else is the B plot.
Yeah.
And that is, yes, I agree, melodramatic. What is interesting is that ordinary world stuff and those techniques that you can create an emotional pathos. And we talked about this on 2 episodes. We did car crash characters, and we did making unlikable protagonists compelling, right? And then I'm sure if you look back at those films, like as good as it gets, it uses very similar things. You're aligning your audience with characters that it would be otherwise reprehensible.
And Arthur in the opening of this film isn't reprehensible. So the
okay, cool. No, I'm gonna bring it up now. Yeah. It's not a back matter question, but Jean Paul. Is it John Paul or is it Jean Paul? Oh man,
it's not Jean, so it's not French, so it wouldn't be Jean.
Okay. Technical question as a new screenwriter. I was always led to believe that you only write down what can be filmed. Yet, yes, those are great lines and fantastic descriptive language, but not filmable. And the answer is, well, they fucking filmed it. And we did a 3-part series on this, Jean-Paul. But the answer is, it's good writing is intention. They're filmable because you can record the intention. And there is a difference between we're going to fill in backstory, right? Which there's ways to shoot, but we're going to give you plot information, or we can write down what should the feeling be, because that feeling of he is better dressed than what he normally wears is actually on screen. Because what's interesting on the second rewatch is I realized how much Arthur wears the same clothes. He wears this hoodie and these clothes, and it's like, oh fuck, he's Paul. He's poor. We can tell he's poor because he wears the same shit, right, every single day. And there's this moment where he's got the nice cardigan. He is dressed a little bit nicer. You can feel that. You won't feel it in quite the same way that you're on the page, but you can feel that there is this element of him that he's gone to an effort to turn up.
Yeah.
And that description about that stupid fucking smile is absolutely something that you can put on the page, and it's something that you can feel. And that writing intention is really important. I did a day-long Writers Guild workshop on writing comedy this week via Zoom, which was interesting. And we actually specifically started talking about big print. And Mark O'Toole, who's awesome, who's been writing comedy for like 30 fucking years, was like, yeah, for comedy, I find myself writing more directions on the page than on drama, because you need to make sure that those actors and the directors, particularly because he's done a lot of sketch, nail what you're after. You're not there necessarily to help them get that. So you need to write down to make sure that they will get it right, because in the end, it's your head on the line when it gets into the edit room and the network executives are sitting there going, why isn't this funny? And the answer is, well, they misinterpreted it. So make sure that they're not going to misinterpret it.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, then there's obviously a risk with the more that you write the intention as opposed to what can be shot, because then it's on someone else to execute that intention. But
yeah.
You know.
So I think what's interesting about the Joker, and I'm glad that I was proven wrong, because I was intending to read the script, but this week turned to not shithouse. It was just ended up being weird week. I expected there to be less of this kind of stuff because it was directed by one of the writers. Right. Whereas the Handmaid's Tale example in the script was written by, yes, a showrunner, but wasn't necessarily going to be directing the pilot.
Didn't he direct the pilot though?
Anyway, maybe I'm wrong.
I think Mike Barker directed the pilot.
Anyway, my expectation would be for television that you actually overwrite this stuff, because you're not necessarily going to be there, and you need to get them. And as we talked about, that kind of the nuances in writing melodrama for television is that you want to capture those complexities of the performance.
Yeah. So just to look, I might just throw in a summary point here as to how I felt about it overall, because Trish has again raised the idea that he was mentally ill. He's not an ordinary person that's necessarily been corrupted by this world. I think the world is part of the pressures on him, but those are in my pros and cons. So should I start with the pros or the cons, Stu?
Yeah, you make it feel like us having to know it being a melodrama is actually a question.
To me, it goes towards the techniques that they use.
Okay, cool. Go on. I'm we've nearly been at this at an hour, so it's worth kind of.
So I'll start with the things that make it a melodrama, and then I'll go with the things that I think don't make it a melodrama. So yes, melodrama, it is the everything about the film is narratively trying to make us empathize and understand Arthur, both cinematic techniques and narrative ones as well. Large portions of the movie are about how little power he has and the cost of endurance. It constantly asks the question as to how much Arthur can bear. And as I said earlier, whenever it wants Arthur to act, the plot happens to him. It places an unbearable pressure on him. It takes away from him. And then laughingly, I concluded it doesn't end. It so much as it closes. But here's going to Trish's point, the things that make it not a melodrama is it's not about an ordinary person. He is a mentally ill person. And not only that, his mental illness makes him an unreliable narrator.
It gets me. Is mental illness not that ordinary?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I guess, like
maybe
all
it's
things,
just
it's
me, but everything, most people I know
have
something.
Yeah, for sure. But
there's an element of this film that's quite ableist, but let's
absolutely
not get into that.
I think you raise a good point, but I think it deliberately sets out Arthur as being with that the laughing condition, the amount of medications he's on.
But the detectives specifically ask him, and I wish I had it excerpted in the podcast, we'll excerpt it, but they're like, is that for real? And he's like, what do you think? And the answer is, like, every time you look back and you go, he could actually be just, it could be a choice. He's making a decision that to transgress and that he can use it to kind of, because he thinks it's funny to laugh at people when situations are, because that's certainly how the Joker does it, the actual Joker character. things that other people think are
I do feel it was
uncomfortable.
It was part of that reveal that drove him over the edge, was that one of his mother's boyfriends gave him a head injury as a child.
Yeah.
That possibly caused it. So the film leans more, I think, in one direction than another, but you're absolutely right.
No, I agree. But they've played that as a revelation, and it happens after the detectives have raised the question. So you're already actively, what you're doing to decide to do is poke holes in the integrity of that's like it changes your relationship to that question.
Yeah. And to me, the biggest thing that makes it not a melodrama is the film, as soon as he has those big moments of violent action, 3 of them are murders, I think. The only one that's not a murder is him actually having the confidence to go and do stand-up, but it does move the plot forward, him choosing to have that active decision.
Sorry, I could have. Yeah, go on.
Well, the other 3 are murders, but after every single one of those decisions, the film rewards Arthur, not in terms of the plot. So Arthur's situation doesn't ostensibly change, right? In fact, often his situation gets worse. After the murders of the Wall Street douchebags, or the Wall Street gang, Arthur gets fired, but he still feels better about it.
Oh, can I play that sequence?
Yeah. Wow.
Hopefully, can we play it and not get stopped?
All right, hold on. Before you play the sequence, can I read the script of the dance that he does that became big part of the trailer? So
the initial dance,
the one in the public bathroom, not the initial one, because the initial one isn't in the script. The one that he does when he gets the gun and he's dancing.
Oh, you mean the dance after he's killed people?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. I've got that queued up. So you read the description and then we can play the scene.
So Arthur bursts into the small bathroom out of breath, overwhelmed, vibrating with emotion. So again, this is very melodrama writing. He leans his head against the door, sweat dripping down his face, and catches his breath. Arthur feels all those emotions running through his body, can feel them all. He sticks his right foot out and starts to slowly turn, his right arm slowly rising above his head as his right foot leads, turning like something is awakening inside of him.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. Okay, this comes back to John Paul's thing about you can't film that stuff. And the answer is you can't. The problem is being overly descriptive would take away the intention of that moment. Because I think this scene, as we're watching, he's bursting in, you definitely get that. But this dancing is you don't want to over describe the specifics, the actual filmable parts as him dancing. But what you want to capture is that intention of him. I mean, look at
Oh, I'm so worried we're about to get blocked. Is there any way you can scroll through this instead of playing it? Because we're going to get in trouble.
It's just, no, I reckon that the cutoff's like 45 seconds. Look, it's his left foot. Ugh. But the way it's even shot is transformative. Yeah.
But, okay. Can you...
Cool. I'm going to pause it now.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to go to the film, and I'm not sure how much of this is Todd Phillips and how much of it is Joaquin Phoenix's performance, but it seeds the dancing. There's a lot more dancing in the film than is actually in the quote unquote shooting script. So
it becomes like a visual motive.
Yeah. That is these quiet moments. So the first time we see him dance is when he gets the gun from Randall and he's at home and he's playing with the gun. And
yes, I don't have that queued up.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you can find it because I've got it in the script. I was just interested that the script plays out very differently to what is shot. So that's, I guess, why I felt maybe it was Joaquin who's bringing in the dancing, because also there's a very similar contrast to the end of the film as well.
Yeah, where he dances at the end, which is this great bookend, which is that kind of hero's journey full circle. But I just want to come back to this because I wanted to show about the dance. And this ties into your point, like about it, but it also why I think you can criticize the film about potentially glorifying the violence, is that he goes from the dancing, this awakening, which I think, as Crop just pointed out, is why the camera may strictly not be able to film it. The actor can certainly play it. This idea that he comes this awakening, goes from this into the slow motion. This is beautiful, and this comes back to our conversation on the Melodramatic podcast. This is like a horror moment. The slow motion follow shot. Just crossing fingers that we don't get banned. It's playing with fire, but I kind of love it.
It's Joe.
And then he comes in and kisses
Sophie. It never says her name. It's in the script as Sophie.
So we get this sense that he is rewarded, that his sense of power, but we go from the violence to the dance to him having this romance. And what is interesting on hindsight, I'm like, I reckon you could probably look at the film techniques that they've chosen to use slow-mos at moments of grandeur, but they're definitely, his body language and everything is empowered. But what does it do on the script, Chaz? That transition. Can you please bring it up? And
which transition are you talking about?
Transition from the dance in the bathroom to him kissing Sophie.
Oh fuck! I just spent a whole lot of time looking for the first dance that wasn't in the script, but I'll find.
But yes, the dancing. While you do that, I can actually just play a little bit of the end scene if we're going to get away with it. Do we want to risk it?
No. Okay. All right. Hold on. I found it. Okay, stop.
Cool.
Stop, Stu. Because it's written really well. All right, so here's the page. Arthur floating out of the elevator and down the hall as if in a dream, coming up on Sophie's door and knocking.
Yeah. Okay, this coming to John Paul's example. This feels like something that is quote unquote an unfilmable. You could be a lot more technical about the explanation of that, but that captures
the intention
and the emotion. And I think what's the film has done so well, credit to Todd Phillips, is that in hindsight, as soon as you reveal it, because I remember when you're like, why is Sophie into this dude? And the answer is because she never was. And I'm like, thank fuck the film has gone there, because there's lots of toxic fucking dudes that seem to get the girl in movies. And it's like, oh, thank fuck that they revealed that it was like bullshit. But when you watch it, you're like, that transition is almost so obvious. Why did I miss this?
The first time I watched the film, I was like, I do not buy that this woman would be into him, because I was watching it, and the first time I saw it, I was buying that it was real and not a fantasy. And then the film expressly tells us that it's a fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Because that idea that she's like, why were you fucking stalking me?
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, because stalking's really hot. Seems to be something that guys are like, oh man, /r nice guys, which is Reddit about nice guys, which is women sharing their stories of these dudes. They're like, they all like Arthur Flex. They're like, I stalked you. I wanted to spend time with you. Yeah. Like that complete incomprehension, which is why people say it was an incel manifesto, but I don't think it's an incel. The incel manifesto is lookism. If you want to go down like a weird rabbit hole, they've got a whole worldview called lookism, which in some ways is actually backed by science. It's true. Good men that other men think attractive are more successful at business, more successful in life in general. And in fact, male attractiveness actually has more impact on other men than it does on women in terms of how they're perceived.
Hopefully,
there's a whole bunch of stuff
and
there's a whole bunch of stuff about analyzing faces and politics, and for like there are people that can determine who's going to win an election based on someone's looks.
Yeah, terrifying.
But depends on what party they stand for as well.
There's an
authoritarian look.
The study that I read, where they just used pictures of like politicians from like the 1930s of elections from other countries, people would predict the winner on a 70% ratio just based on looks. So
who would win an election here, Chaz? Me or you?
We'll leave our listeners.
That's going to be a Patreon poll. Who would you vote for president of the world, Chaz or Stu? Everyone just votes.
Other wins in a landslide.
Arthur Fleck wins.
But okay, so that in that sequence following the murders, where you've got the dance, but you've also got him just feeling good about life, like he dances with his mother.
He's got power.
He feels, even though he gets fired and is thrown out, he feels powerful. He has agency, and then they have to like break him down out of those moments. And so that's where I mean that they sort of go back into melodrama, like where the cops start investigating him, or you've got the scene that he has with Bruce Wayne at the gate. The plot has to start breaking him down again till he can take violent action once more. And that is the only difference that I saw. That the Thomas Wayne story wasn't the only melodrama story, that all the stories were kind of melodrama stories until, like, pushing Arthur until he goes over the limit.
Yeah, actually, look, that's, I think there is B plot, but I don't think that the effect of the world, like, I mean, what is the effect of the world on Arthur is kind of a plot question. But going back to our way of thinking about things, and maybe this is me not thinking about it in terms of melodrama, which is weird given how much, you know, I'm interested in speculative fiction and the impact of worlds on people, that it felt like the Thomas Wayne storyline was a dramatization of the large questions about the haves and haves not. Because ultimately it's about, one of the things I loved about this film is it's like, yeah, the Waynes are kind of pieces of shit.
Loved that.
You know, it's like Batman.
Thomas Wayne is so fucking lionized in every other Batman story, but in this one, it's like he is a total rich asshole.
But it's like, this also is, it's actually Bruce Wayne's point of view. You need me to save you.
No.
You know, like, I mean, which is actually what was so interesting about Dark Knight Rises, is I really like the Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises like just solidified this kind of New England perspective of like, we're there, the rich white man is there to make sure that you don't hurt yourselves.
Yeah. And I think this film did much better. Like, both this and The Dark Knight Rises are ostensibly dealing with the clash between haves and haves nots, right? As
seen from the point of view of haves, they're animals, and the fact that they even quote this, that, you know, they're animals. And it's like, oh yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's by the by. And and that's one of the things I liked about this film, because you're like, maybe it's just that if I did I would have portrayed the Joker as less as a psychopath and more aware of what's made him. He's in this, I think maybe that's just my personal dislike of the film. Here he stumbles into being a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in my version, he would have become aware of his political situation.
Yeah.
A little bit earlier.
So can I just want to do my final bit of contrast, I feel, is on the cinematography and the performance, particularly of the final scene. And there's just one moment in there where the script differs so completely from what is shot and performed. So
you mean the very final scene, as in post?
No, sorry, not the final scene, not the climax of the film, on the Franklin show, Murray.
Oh, okay,
Murray
cool.
Franklin show.
Okay, cool. Okay,
right.
Okay, cool. Not the final scene's him on the car. That's not even the final scene. Okay, so there's three endings.
Okay,
there's like three.
There is. I mean, that is part of the issue, I think, of this film. That
it's like Lord of the Rings. There's like three endings.
All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna queue up the how Joker. So we've had Joker killing Randall in that horror movie sequence, and this is possibly
that's Randall's his friend,
the guy who sells him the gun. And
speaking of Taxi Drivers, he's cast very similar to one of the characters in Taxi Driver. They've cast someone who's very similar. Ooh.
So this is the scene where he murders Randall. Okay. So, I mean, this is another perhaps part of where this isn't a melodrama, is because in Joker, there's lots of sequences where, because it's an anti-hero story, Joker is the person you're not worried about in the scene. In this shot that we've got up here, you are worried about Gary, and the Joker is the monster, right? He's the slasher in the horror movie. And there's sequences like that with Sophie. There's sequences like that with his mother. So the film periodically drops very much out of the point of view of Arthur and makes Arthur the shark from Jaws. But anyway, he's excited. He's come to himself. He's become Joker. The script no longer reveals to him as Arthur. He's run away from the cops. He's got to the Murray Franklin show, and he's about to come on, right? And he has become someone else, right? He is preparing his suicide, as Stu has said. Like, that's his plan, is to kill himself live on air. And you see him here. He's still, he's confident, he's calm, and he comes out and he does a dance, and he kisses one of the co-hosts. I don't know if I should play it because I'm much more terrified. But again, this dancing motif comes back that is not in the shooting script as much as it is in the film. So he does this dance and he comes out through the script. Now, I'm just going to contrast that moment with what is written in the shooting script. So behind the curtain, sorry, I'm going to highlight this bit as well. Behind the multicolored curtain, Joker gathers himself ready for his moment. He doesn't hear his introduction. On set, the curtains open. The jazz orchestra are playing Joker on. He doesn't come out. Murray looks over to the empty space in the curtain. The audience laughs. Behind the curtain, Joker sees the stagehand motioning for him to go out. Joker starts out, pausing when he takes a step into the bright lights. The stagehand doesn't see him stop, drops the curtain back onto Joker before the audience can really see his face, tangling Joker up in the curtain. The audience keeps laughing, thinking it's part of the act. The band plays on. Joker untangles himself from the curtain and the audience gets a good look at him. So it is playing Joker still as the victim and not as, like, that is a melodrama portrayal of Joker. So he's played as the victim. He's played as something comical. He gets tied up in the curtain. He trips over. He's not in control. Audiences are laughing at him. He's scared. He's nervous. And you contrast that to what is actually in the film, where he is fully in control by now. He has become Joker. He has confidence.
This moment where he kind of, it's amazing. Like, we feel the transformation coming back to that line.
Yeah.
Like
So you see here, he's not tangled up in the curtain. He's not, falling over. He's so part of himself. Doing his little dance, and the dance that again is much more part of, maybe it's what Joaquin bought, maybe it was found on set, maybe it was part of the rewrites. I'm not wanting to take away from any of particular creative. I'm just pointing out the big difference of this motif, and the power that you feel in this scene is very different to what's written in the script. The script is going more to melodrama, even at this climactic point, as him being a victim of circumstance and being created by the world around him and the plot happening to him, rather than what actually happens.
Which is a choice that they've made, and that would have affected the reading quite substantially, or certainly my reading of the film. Yeah. Because I think I think those films that see it as a glorification of the Joker and the empowerment of violence are completely valid. And actually those who say that he is someone that is driven to this by the society are also valid. And I think this is the question, not the question of our time, but certainly a very active question with people that choose violence.
One of our listeners has said, Simon Trevorrow has said, Joaquin Phoenix found the dancing on set. And it's such an integral part of the film.
Yeah, the revision, as in, you mean that he's been coming, it absolutely gives him an arc, right? And this is the danger, and this is a political thing, but the danger of a character arc of an anti-hero is that the film, like the Zero Dark 30 thing, structurally what it is saying is that he is becoming empowered by violence. And so that violent action, the argument of the film shows that it is empowering, right? So, but I think I was going to play, I'm going to play the end dance, and we'll see if we get cut off. Because I think this is interesting is that the way it uses iconography, and I actually think this is beautiful filmmaking. And I think for me, what is personally frustrating about Joker as a film is that there's such a beautiful direction. There's this really refreshing direction for a mainstream film. This does not feel like a Marvel film. It's directed with, I don't want to say intelligence. All the Marvel films are directed with intelligence, but it's got a personal style. It's use of wide angle lenses, its willingness just to hang on a performance, to not have to feel cut away. Stuff that you see in melodrama, actually, that the willingness to linger on a performance, to kind of let us access the interiority of the character, to tell a character arc through dance, right? You know, I mean, this is pretty amazing visual storytelling. It's just that it combines with like a ideology, for lack of a better word, that it's not quite clear, kind of irritates me. But I guess that's what I'm interested in. You know, I once, like, it's in my notes, from 12 years ago, which is directing is imposing a world view on material, right?
But both you and I agreed that if the film had ended here, it would have at least planted its flag more clearly, right?
Yeah, he's become empowered. He's accidentally become a jihadist, you know, and then he's now being celebrated by millions. And it should potentially operate as a warning, depending on what they do in the end credits. It's like, this is how radicalization happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And he doesn't give a shit about any of those.
At the cause. He doesn't give a shit about the cause. Like, he's contradictory speeches.
Yeah. Oh,
stop. Stop what? Stop playing this so we don't get blocked.
Stop playing it. We've been blocked.
We haven't been blocked yet. I'm watching. Crob's just been here for the blocking. Oh, and it's a good frame to end on, actually. Like the fact that he uses the blood.
Put on a happy face.
To put on the happy face. Right.
Yeah. Crob is saying beware the bots. But it's, to me, this would have been, at least it would have planted its flag. And I get it. There's a whole lot of people who are really worried about this film because it's like, it's lionizing someone who finds empowerment through violence. But
we have to be aware of the intoxication and the empowerment of violence.
Yeah. And I never saw it as anything but critical. I never saw it as anything as being like, this is, I don't think anyone would go into that film wanting to be Arthur Fleck and coming out of it wanting to be Arthur Fleck. And, you know, maybe that's my privileged point of view, but there's one of my other films. It was a Michael Winterbottom film, and I keep talking about it, and maybe we should analyze it on the podcast so I can get it out of my system once and for all. But it was this like neo-noir film, again, another delusional protagonist. Oh, what the fuck was it called? The one with Casey Affleck, where he commits horrific violence against women. It's
the serial killer film. We have actually talked about it before in the context of making unlikable protagonists compelling.
And it puts us in his point of view. And because it put us in his point of view, the film just made me deeply uncomfortable. It didn't make me feel, I want to go out and beat up women now. It's like, holy fuck, this has made me complicit in beating up women.
Man, I would actually... Films that make you feel dirty, like... I think Fight Club, I think Finch is very good at it when he uses his power. You know, they do that thing where you're intoxicated by the violence and you feel the thrill, and then they turn around and make you feel bad for it and make you go, oh shit. Like that is...
And that's the film's called The Killer Inside Me.
Yes. Right. And they're, you know, coming back to that comedy workshop, I was like, what are your favorite comedies? I'm like, Starship Troopers is one of my favorite comedies of all time, right? Like the satire is so close to the bone that it makes you go, fuck yeah, kill those bugs. And then you have like, I can't believe I just said that, right? And that requires understanding of narrative craft and filmmaking craft to how the story, what the story is told, how it is told, to make you have those complexity of emotions. But as we've talked about many times, there's also an upper limit to visual, the literacy, both visual and narratively, in people unable to interpret material, right?
For sure, yeah. Like ultimately, it's on the audience, and this film definitely, with its fucking "It's All a Dream" ending. One of the things that we went to that Slap Harry. One of the tips it said is don't end it with "this was all a dream," and Joker fucking ends with a potential read that this was all a dream. That's not the way I personally read it, but I didn't think that final scene added anything to the movie whatsoever and only detracted from it.
Well, I think it's an interesting choice because obviously the imagery is really intoxicating. You know, intoxicating is the wrong word, but the white footprints, and look, it's interesting because it could also be that he was caught, right? And he's just recollecting over the events and was like, you can't believe I was turned into this like folk hero. It's actually fucking hilarious because I pretty much told everyone that I've got no politics, right?
Yeah.
he's a narcissist like his mum, which is what we're told. His mum's a narcissist, which is that he doesn't care about the politics because politics is fundamentally, well, actually, I don't want to talk about right-wing politics, but there is an element of politics being aware of other people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what all messaging is about, right? Ultimately, is your ability to communicate your point of view. And I think the criticisms of this film stem from Todd Phillips very firmly and deliberately sitting on a fence around a lot of things. But this isn't a review podcast. It isn't to be critical. I took so much from this film about, we are told so much as English speaking filmmakers that the characters must drive every scene. And this film gives me the confidence to actually go scene after scene after scene of the plot taking over and things happening to the character. If that's what the effect that I want, if I want to drive the audience to feeling empathy with the character, if that's what I want, if I want them to feel what the character is feeling. And this film gave me a lot of confidence in doing that.
Which is probably why I felt like a hand grenade for so many people, is that it used narrative, not just and directorial techniques, but they were
so much music.
But not just on the music. The score is amazing, and it does so much. And the fact that they do, and this is more of a video essay thing, but the prelapse that they use, where actually we haven't talked about the stand-up scene. We should actually do a little bit of a close narrative analysis before we end it. But the way they use prelapse to kind of comment on the previous scene, it's actually very similar to The Watchmen. I was thinking about Alan Moore's use of prelapse and postlapse, and how that was commenting on the current scene as way of this having the vibe of it being self-aware, which is, I guess, as I said, why I'm so frustrated by this film, because the filmmaking technique is beautiful. I just think it was slightly pretentious about the message it had to say, but maybe that's just it being sincere, like maybe Todd Phillips really is concerned about, the society and the world in which monsters can be created. And I think coming back to this idea of incels and stuff, it's much as, they're just horrible men. You shouldn't give them any airtime. And I'm someone who's like, no, they come out of fucking somewhere, right? And we ignore that to our peril. You kind of push people out. You push those forums out of Reddit, and they'll go to Vote, they'll go to 4chan, and they'll actually go to places where the voices of moderation are not there because they're no longer in the mainstream. And instead, the echo chamber, and it's always an echo chamber, but the echo chamber doesn't have people like me. The echo chamber only has other people that reinforces those fucking really extreme beliefs, and what ends up happening is they just become narrow and just become extremely anyway.
Well, you are talking to someone who made a half-hour broadcast documentary on how people can escalate to child molestation. Well, it's not pedophilia. Very few child molesters are pedophiles. That was the most fascinating thing that I learned, is that pedophiles are people who are solely, almost to exclusion, sexually attracted to children. Whereas the majority of child molesters are actually identify as straight heterosexual men who just are unable to form adult relationships, intimate relationships with women. And so they put adult characteristics onto children so that they can form those intimate bonds.
Which, having watched your documentary, put the whole kind of Catholic priest thing in context, because it was like, if you deprive people from that ability of being able to form intimate relationships with adults, and then they're in fact the only intimate relationships that that's it is terrifying, but it shows how this horrible behavior can be created. And look, the broad point I took from it is demonizing something that is awful. Not to say that to be on the side of pedophiles, but demonizing it doesn't help stop the problem. No, and in fact,
it could be that Todd Phillips is making the same point.
Yeah, and it's actually the second time I brought it up this week. There's a book I'm like halfway through, and I put it down because it's really confronting, called The Lucifer Effect by, I'm never going to say his name properly. It's like Philip Zombrado, who became, so the psychologist has set up the Stanford experiment, right? And obviously if you do the Stanford experiment, which is that prison thing where they, they set up a fake prison at a university, and then the guards turned on the inmates. It was horrible. He ended up basically spending a career going, how the fuck did this happen? How did I allow it to happen? And, you know, some people were horrified because he was an expert witness for the defense for the guards at Guantanamo Bay, right? But his argument wasn't that they were individually responsible, that it was an institution that was designed to produce the behaviors that happened. And then in fact, what happens is that people set up these institutions that create this abhorrent behavior, and then they blame the individuals. Yeah. And then it allows them to continue setting up the institutions. It's like a fucking franchise.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of franchises, do we want to kind of go into a deep dive of the stand-up sequence?
Well, the main reason why I don't think I hopped on about it is the script actually does less of the heavy lifting in this stand-up sequence than it does in any other sequence. So here he is on stage at the comedy club. He's laughing. He finally composes himself, tells his first joke. It's terrible. But in the big print, it says, Arthur keeps cracking up. Hard to hear anything or anybody else. So it is telling us what the cinematic technique is going to be, whereas we don't know what the audience reaction is going to be, and they only reveal that to us later because we're still in Arthur's POV where he feels he is being the best stand-up comedian ever. And then it just says the music swells, right? Close on Arthur, looking out into the audience, sees Sophie sitting in the back laughing, and that's all that happens in the film as well. So the script cheats in the same way that the film cheats somewhat, I guess, by just limiting our point of view to Arthur's point of view and limiting us to his experience.
Actually, that reminds me, before we go to it, apparently there's a deleted scene. Apparently, it could be someone's like fucking headcanon, where Sophie watches Arthur on the Murray Franklin show at the very end, that they cut away to her and her being horrified. Right? Because, and they took it out because it's not from his point of view, and the whole film is almost exclusively told from Arthur's point of view.
Except those moments where whenever Arthur feels empowered, like that moment where Arthur is following Sophie, yes, it's told from his point of view, but you are worried about Sophie. That moment with Gary, the midget, trying to get out of Arthur's apartment, you are worried about Gary. You are
as a short person, I'm always worried about my ability to reach the lock. I shouldn't say that. That's actually really horrible.
But the point is, the film, whenever it dips into its thriller sequences, and it does it for pacing reasons, it does it for all manner of things. It
humor, like we're laughing about that sequence because it's fun.
It's telling a fucking midget joke, and somehow makes it almost okay. I don't know,
but it's actually great transgressive humor because it's inverting the expectations. Because instead of us being horrified for him, we laugh in a gallows way. The transgressive nature of like, holy fuck, he must be terrified. And I was pretty terrified for him when I was watching. I was like, oh, fucking Arthur is going to kill him. And it's like, no, you were kind to me. And you're like, they've actually done a good way. They've done a good job of going, Arthur's right. He's actually is one of the few people that have been kind to Arthur.
And
which is the complexity of the film, because Arthur isn't a pleasant, like, he's not someone that is nice. He's not very funny. He's not very charismatic. He's not very good looking. He's kind of a dick, right? He brings a gun to, like, all the reasons to not like Arthur are actually pretty good reasons to not like Arthur. Yeah. You know, but he is treated with humanity, you know, by this one person.
I think this is an amazing exploration of how someone gets rewarded for violence in an uncaring society. Ultimately, as a Batman comics fan, I don't think it's the creation of Joker, because in any comic story, the Joker is not looking for kindness. That is not what the Joker is looking for. And look, maybe you could argue that this film is about the creation of the Joker because Arthur learns the only way he gets kindness is through attention. And he
actually ceases to be concerned about kind. He wants respect.
Yeah. And you've potentially got that argument. I mean, as a Batman fan, I love this film. I loved the themes that it brought up. I loved how angry a film it was. Like, it gave us permission to be angry at the injustices of the world that we are in. But equally, you could argue that it gives, you know, incels and toxic men permission to be angry as well.
And I say this as a man I think we need to engage. This is like, I feel like Donnie, not Donnie, is it Donnie? No, the other guy that I actually really like, that it had such a terrible reputation, but he always be like, take care of yourselves and each other. Can't remember who it was. You've never watched. Wow, this is really embarrassing. But it was like this moment of like, yeah, you push these, like, we can say we're not interested in the Arthur Flecks of the world, but they are going to act out in violent rebellion. So try to reach out. Let's have a quick look at because if it drops out, it's right at the very end before we do back matter.
So the actual scene and how it plays.
Yeah, because I think there's some really interesting techniques here, right? Which is, and I'm happy to skip forward because we don't need to hear the jokes.
No, the transition happens,
and this is horror,
halfway through the set where the
yeah. So this is him leading into it, and this comes into your observation that Joker is kind of a horror film. Again, I've made it many times, but these kind of follow shots feel straight out of horror films. So they're really interesting. They became very popular after The Wrestler. These long kind of tracking shots, but I think they're about, at one point I was going to do a video essay on the relationship and those dramatic positions, you know, the head of the character, behind the character, equal with the character.
If you do that essay, I'm going to make you watch The American, the George Clooney film.
It's Jerry Springer. I really love Jerry Springer because there was like a real humanity to him, because he's like, he wasn't just laughing at these people. He was legitimately like, you're fucking idiots, but I really want to understand. I don't know. There was something really complicated about Jerry Springer that I liked.
In The American, the entire film is shot from this thing, and it's George Clooney, and it's a spy sort of, it's almost like a Jason Bourne film, but told in this kind of style.
Yeah, the follow shot. And I've talked about the third camera person, I believe, on a previous episode, while I think third person video games are more emotionally affecting than first person. And that's because there's this awareness that they create this dichotomy. It's not just my incorrect pronunciation, but like, we are aware that we're following a character while also experiencing it as a character. We feel something for the person that we're following. Right. Whereas first person, we have no sense of it is something that is happening to us as opposed to something that is happening to someone that we're watching. And look, God, yeah, I mean, this is again me just dropping. This is what happens when you drink nearly I drank the whole bottle of an Imperial bourbon stout. This idea that men have not men. I'm using it in a couple M as a class rather than you specifically. But that empathy is something that is not necessarily valued. And I think that there is a lot of people that have not learned empathy, and maybe that is related to reading, because there is this idea that reading is connected with the rise of empathy. I think Stephen Cleary told this whole story about people who used to torture cats a lot, and basically animal torture dropped once like the modern printing press came into being, because people could learn to see things from different point of views. Anyway, so this whole point is sequence is to come in and make us experience this not just as the Joker, but feel something for Joker. The tension, right? And having, as someone who's gone on stage, and I know you have, and in a way, like going on, our live stream is like going on stage, but that moment of like standing on the sidelines and going, fuck, it's my turn, fuck, it's my turn, fuck, it's my turn. It's about putting you in the shoes of Arthur, right? While also making us feel like, so we're experiencing the emotion while also experiencing his experiencing of the emotion.
Yeah.
Which is why follower shots are better than first person view shots. Anyway, that's the reason. I think they're more emotionally complex. He finds Sophie in the corner, right? And the camera finds it, we find it, comes back, he's telling the story, and it's like, okay, cool. Fuck. And at this point in this film, we're kind of with his mother. He's probably not that funny. We've seen some of his jokes. They've had a close up on his joke book. And you're like, I want him to be really good.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like the plot character question at this point is, what is going to happen to Arthur when he learns that he is not funny?
Yeah. Right. Like, yeah, that's the tension comes from that moment. Right. Again, this handheld shaky shot, all about getting us into that perspective. It's actually a really, I mean, that's like a 1 minute Steadicam shot. Once it started from the CU, you know, and he starts doing the uncontrollable laughter, which we've set up, and we're like, oh, fuck. right? And you just know, like, you've gone to comedy festival, you've gone to festival stuff, you've been in a bad show, haven't you, Chaz?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I
it's
still
like
have flashbacks of this comedy guy that I went to go see, where he was pulling every trite, tough crowd gag out, and none of us were laughing, and it was just, I felt for him so bad.
Yeah, and you're like, this is super awkward. And actually, this reminds me, I saw a a sex clown at comedy festival last year unintentionally. There's a whole long story
unintentionally.
About the fact, unintentionally. It was like a variety show. My friend Haley, I ended up using her comedy pass. For some reason, for the last 10 years, we get mistaken and for each other. And the only reason I can think of is that we wear glasses and have hair of roughly the same color and length, and no one wants to acknowledge it. Anyway, I was like, a sex clown, she would be a better Joker than the Joker. If I was going to make a Joker film now, I'd make it a woman, because that feels more transgressive. I want to make it Harley Quinn, I would get someone who's like a fucking sex clown. Like, literally, this woman shaved herself in front of the whole audience.
How many times
she's stripped naked.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 200 people. She's stripped naked and
I mean, but that's like a one night only performance.
Yeah, I know. I guess she used like some hair growth thing. So he laughs a lot. But it's like that element of like, this is really awkward. And I'm looking at other people, and it's like, and you know, to me, having gone to a few comedy shows, have been in these moments where you're like watching someone die, and you're like looking at each other, and you're like, oh, fuck, this is this emotional experience. And this is really intense. Like the use of because I think they shot this on 65mm. Those, because in 65mm, I'm not going to go into the directing thing, but those wide angle lenses that are in close create a certain kind of intimacy that's different from telephoto. It's the same format shot in The Master, and I think that's interesting in terms of how they used Joaquin Phoenix. I definitely think that Todd Phillips sat down and watched The Master at least a couple of times before watching this, in terms of shooting Joaquin Phoenix.
Would the close-ups in Handmaid's Tale, would those have been 50mm?
They were, I think Handmaid's Tale shot 16mm. So much shorter depth of field.
Yeah.
But they definitely shot wide angle lenses, like 16, 18mm lenses. But in a larger, I'm happy to be corrected, but in a larger film format, the wide angle lenses are longer. So like in anamorphic, a 40mm lens is equivalent to a 25mm lens of spherical 35mm, which is kind of equivalent to the lens of like a 20mm 16.
But the trick that happens with this particular sequence that you look at is it doesn't switch to the fantasy. I mean, look, the fantasy is that Sophie's there, but it's not telling us in the same way that it's a fantasy until the music swells, which is after he tells his first joke.
Is that coming through? I don't know. Maybe I need to stop.
It's not coming through to me, but don't get us blocked.
I'm not trying. Oh, okay. Screen share. Share computer sound. All right.
Don't do it, Stu. Don't do it.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It's not coming through.
It's not coming through. Thank God.
And then we
but
cut to her.
But this is, but this is the bit where it's become fantasy, and again,
it does it with the sound transition.
Yeah, and the sound's kind of still playing here, and the music, and you've got the bit with her calling him a hero, even though she doesn't know in his fantasy that she's talking about him. So there's, I on second watch, it felt so obvious in terms of the color grade and how it was shot. But on first watch, I was completely sucking in. I thought this is actually happening and that she was actually with him on this date.
Yeah, I agree. And you're like, why? And I'm like, the only reason is some kind of like fucking pathetic fantasy of like, oh, I killed someone and now I'm going to be like hot.
Okay. Well, we led with our conclusions. And one of my big learnings from this is definitely that you can use melodrama techniques, that I don't have to be afraid of certain scenes and sequences of letting the character not drive the plot. essentially. But it has to be a choice, I guess. It has to be, what effect do I want on the audience by doing that?
Yeah, and I think the fact that they made us, it was fairly, and I think they used our expectations against us. This idea that would be like, why would she be with him? And the answer is she wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, but he likes the idea. We did get suspended. Keep talking, Jazz.
Okay. Krob says we're back, so I'm going to trust him.
Not me.
I will never trust you, Stu. So, look, I don't know if we missed the conclusion that I had, but mine was just like, I know from watching this film that I don't have to be afraid of letting the plot actually take over and to let my characters feel out of control. It's just a choice that I now have at my disposal, but knowing that I will only want to do that if I want my audience to deeply empathize with my character.
And I think for me, that idea that there are techniques that you can use to bring your audience into unlikable characters, there is definitely some stuff in there. And the lingering. There's a lot of lingering in the directorial work, but the way that you've shown it, how they've done the equivalent of lingering on a shot on the page is really important, right?
Yeah.
Because it really brings us into Arthur's point of view. Because I think what was controversial about the film is how much it led us into the worldview of Arthur, as opposed to put us at a distance of someone that we're meant to be like about, right? That's important. All right. So is there anything else to add? I feel like we're doing conclusions as we were going. So maybe we kind of switch to back matter for those who are able to matter back.
So is there anyone online? Any questions from our live listeners? And
while you think of those questions, one of many thanks to our supporters, Christopher Walker and Alex Brandette, the Draft Zero interns, kind of like the first of the Joker followers, really. To all our patrons, but in particular, Chris Walker, who is the same Chris Walker as the above, both a Patreon and a intern. Jack Smith, Jesse Laurie, Krob, Edmonds. Hi, Krob, you're in the chat as well. Matteo.
Yeah.
Matteo Bernardini,
I would say.
Okay, Nick MacArthur, Sandra Willis, happy Mother's Day. Yes, that is my mum. And Theus Bergstrom, you guys are awesome. Thanks for supporting us, but also thank to everyone that's become a patron recently. You guys rock. We know it's a really tough time, so finding any kind of bit of money really helps and brings you more Draft Zero more often, which is like fucking 3 times actually, given that we released last week, it's like once a week. How you get through it all is insane. I can't even put up. I can't even put up with Jazz once a week, or me. I try to put up with me once a day.
This live stream has been brought to you by Mad River Brewing Jamaican Red Ale and a Campos Milk Stout from Batch.
One of those is American. One of those is not. One of those is from New South Wales. No questions?
Oh, we've been going for 2 hours.
Yeah, I'd have more questions after 2 hours. Like, why did you guys have to go on for so long?
All right, I've got a question for you. Do you think the ending defines whether a story is a melodrama or not? Because Chris Walker was asking us about Animal Kingdom, and that felt similar to Joker in terms of you've got a character who has no power and the world is just oppressing them and taking away from them and throwing shit at them until finally they take action and end up empowered. And again, like Joker, it's like an anti-hero story. But unlike Joker, it felt like those moments of action that Jay can take in Animal Kingdom are much more near the end of the film than with Joker, where they're sort of dotted throughout.
Yes, I think there's partly a gun culture aspect to it, which is just the given circumstances that guns are much harder to come by in Australia, even when Animal Kingdom was set, which was like late 90s. I think absolutely endings really is a hero's journey. Like, you know, to kind of come back to what my point was about the Joker, part of what makes this feel not super melodramatic, like as in Joker story, I think is the hero's journey, because he learns about the power of violence, returns to the ordinary, he's challenged, and then returns to his world, having learned about the power of violence. Whereas I don't think Jay returns to an ordinary world in that understanding of what the hero's journey is. And I'm not trying to get it, and I'm deliberately avoiding those conversations that we alluded to in our hero's journey structure about it ultimately being a very hugely selective, biased kind of story. Selective biased, is that even a thing?
But we had regular listener and Patreon Sunday thank us for the podcast that we released last week, because it's given her a language to talk to people about why her films are the way they are.
Yes. And importantly, she is one, a female, two, she's writing about women that are under the power of men. And I think naturally a story like Joker plays differently because it is a white man with a gun, you know, and those are two important characteristics. Just to speak to recent circumstances, I think if the Joker was a black man with a gun or a black woman with a gun, all would have changed the way it was received, because it would change the way that the characters would receive the Joker. I know I'm getting political there, but I think that is, I just think that is a truism, right? We only need to look at recent circumstances about
Ahmed Aubrey.
The jogger, right? And the idea of how that was dealt with, and if it was race switched, it would be played so differently. Right. And I think the fact that he is a angry white middle-age-ish man, you know, allows him to get away with a certain kind of thing. I know that's I know it's controversial. I know, like I don't even know if it is controversial. It's certainly controversial if you're an idiot.
Rob has asked what about Little Women spoke to me in particular, because it was one of his favorite films.
I haven't seen it yet, and we want to talk about it with parallel storylines.
Okay, so we'll find a way to analyze it on the podcast in a certain way. I haven't rewatched it, so I don't know. I can't put my finger analytically on what spoke to me, but basically the film made me cry from happiness and then cry from sadness, and alternated those two things almost for the entire length of its runtime. So I had almost 2 hours of having an emotional outpouring. And look, from a craft perspective, and we'll talk about the parallel storylines, I think it's a narrative masterclass in terms of how it told the ending of the movie at the beginning. It didn't tell the movie chronologically, and those two parallel storylines, as Stu said, is one of the things that we're going to look at in a future episode, because of the narrative options that gives us. And how, I mean, the clearest example in that film is the two sicknesses that the sister had, the one that she survived and then the one that she died in. And they play those out at the same time to contrast the feeling of someone recovering from illness and then losing someone. I don't know. Like, that film is just magic in terms of how it's written, how it's directed, how it's performed, the music. I cannot speak highly enough about it. Okay, so Crab asked whether did I know the story before? I'd seen the Winona Ryder version. Was it Gillian Armstrong that directed that version? Am I out of my mind? Anyway, so I had seen a version of the story beforehand, and it's one of my wife's favorite books and films. So I knew roughly of the story, but the way that Greta Gerwig wrote that film and then subsequently directed it is still astonishing to me. So Stu, we'll have to make you watch Little Women.
Yes. Doesn't require that much. I had one other observation that's just escaped me.
Oh, well, probably time for me to go and cook dinner for my family anyway, because we eat at ridiculously early o'clock.
3 o'clock is ridiculously.
No, we're not going to eat at 3 o'clock. It just takes me 2 hours to cook. But still, 5 o'clock is still
It
ridiculous.
takes you 2 hours to heat up a food in the microwave.
You've eaten my food before, Stuart Willis.
Okay. What is it? Little men. That's what you're talking about. LM, Trish. Talking about LM. I actually no. I had one question for us, but now I've oh god, I had it, and now this is the kind of thing that we get cut from the podcast to make us sound more intelligent.
Oh, there's the lucky viewers of our YouTube live stream get to see how dumb we are.
I had something about like it was like back matter for us related to the Little Women thing, and it was this idea of what is melodrama and how that relates to our storytelling. Coming back to like I was trying to bring it even full circle, even with like back mattery stuff. But
I'm glad. So one of the reasons why we've delayed on our Sofia Coppola episode a little bit is so that we could get this kind of learning under our belt first.
Unfilmables and like melodrama.
And character-driven sequences. So I think we'll be able to talk about the skill in Sofia's writing more as a result of this learning.
We understand exactly why it is so
compelling. Exactly is a big word, Stu.
Nothing in my life is exact. My seat came off my bike seat, like the actual cushiony part last night. Anyway,
at least it hadn't been stolen this time.
Small mercies. All right, are we done? Is that what you're saying?
Done. I don't know what else to say.
We just sit in silence for 20 seconds and go, this is your last opportunity.
But thank you in particular to John Paul McGowan as a new listener who's joined in the live stream, but all the old faithfuls, Tall Paul, Trish and Crob, thank you for joining us live. And to anyone else, I hope we didn't waffle on for too long.
Oh, actually, this is where I will end in this may spark us a conversation. What I found was relevant about melodrama is that we are living through a melodrama right now.
Yes.
That is what is COVID-19 is. We are living in a world in which something has happened outside of our control. And then we have a degree of agency. I mean, the fact is I could choose to break.
We have choices, but not agency. We can't make COVID go away.
Yes. And so I think it's really interesting. I think the impact of that on storytelling is going to be very telling. This idea that you can't have heroes, like we may never come up with, we may not come with a vaccine. There's this whole thing to do with like the fact that the
upper respiratory tract
is seen as like skin by the immune system and all this shit. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff where we may never be able to defeat it in terms of what we understand as the hero's journey. And that may end up becoming something that we just endure. So I think it'd be interesting to see whether melodrama becomes more of a thing. I mean, post-COVID.
It already was in TV, right? Like you and I, we've done 2 episodes, I think, on Game of Thrones, and Sansa's storyline was a melodrama storyline until she became Queen in the North.
Yes.
You know, the Sopranos melodrama, fucking the fact that there was a plot line in Stranger Things, which is the most genre plotted, conventional nostalgia porn around. You know, I think what I've appreciated about this more than anything is just that it gives me the courage of my convictions to try things that prevailing wisdom has told us not to ever do. Correct.
I hate that people say correct. Sounds good. Sounds good. Yes, but I just think it'd be interesting to see the storytelling in the same way that like September 11 kind of permeated American storytelling, right? You know, city level destruction became a thing in modern movies. This idea that these events in people's lives that people didn't have were not directly responsible for, yet alone were directly responsible for fixing.
Yeah.
And it's just how you survive in whatever manifestation of that.
Yeah.
You know, which is something that his horror deals with. And we never really talked about The Joker as a horror film, but you know.
No, but horror, and as we dealt with in the podcast, war movies, there are lots of genres that are very male driven, that rely on melodrama techniques. Yeah. And I appreciated the slap happy Larry. Anyway, they went into that very well in terms of drawing distinctions between different films within the same genre.
All right, we're done.
Trish has concluded with the loudest voice is not always the most valid, and I'm
that
not
is
100%
true, Chaz.
sure.
Who's the loudest voice here? That is the question. Chaz, the answer is Chaz.
All right, see you, mate.
I've got a remote desktop and then end the stream. More.